Hi, Gio here. Before we get into this episode, I wanted to give a quick content warning. The details in this episode may be more graphic than they usually are. The exact content warning will be in description, but listener discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome to Loaves to Legends, your new favourite history podcast brought to you by Sandwich Guildhall Museum. I'm your host, Gia, and I'm here with the rest of our lovely Loaves to Legends team to entertain, educate, and indulge you in all things big and small related to our gorgeous town of Sandwich. Shortly, I'll be joined by our second host of today, Isabel, to give you today's episode. But before we get into that, I want to encourage all of you wonderful people to not just listen, but to get involved too. One of the things we want to emphasize at Loaves Legends is that this podcast is your podcast as much as it is ours. We have a wonderful online community and you can chat to other history-loving fans on our Discord. Or you can email us any facts or feedback at loavetolegends@gmail.com. The link to both the Discord and the email are in the episode description. Welcome back to Loaves to Legends. I'm Gia and I'm joined here today with Isabel. Hi Isabel.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Welcome back. Isabel has been here before, of course, so it's fantastic to have you back here to do part 1 of our Farley episode.
It's wonderful to be back.
Brilliant. Just so you listeners at home know, this episode was researched and written by our museum manager, Millie. So both Isabel and myself, as we tell you and educate you on this tale, we will also be reacting to it live for the first time as well. So we're all in this together, all on the same boat here. Without further ado, let's get into it. Occasionally when working in her office, Manager Millie reports hearing a volunteer announce, "You are now back in Elizabethan England," after leading visitors down some rather creaky wooden steps. The visitors then find themselves in a room that's a world apart from most other rooms in the Guildhall.
Gia is talking, of course, about the 16th century courtroom. While no time travelling actually takes place, visitors say they feel a change in atmosphere as they enter the room, that it's almost eerie. They also comment on the smell. Nearly everything about the room gives the feeling that it has stood for almost 400 years, which it pretty much has.
Now, picture this, if you can. You're standing at the top of an aisle, like the kind you might walk up to get married. A red carpet stretches down the aisle in front of you towards a gate, and beyond the gate, doors with glass panels framed by dark wood, which are usually covered by red velvet curtains. A red carpet and red curtains might be a bit garish, but not in a room like this. Here, they fit the surroundings perfectly, because this room is also panelled in warm, rich brown oak. On your left is a raised platform, fenced in, with metal spikes behind the chairs. On your right, there is another raised platform, with fencing on 3 sides. Beyond those points are many small wooden chairs filling the space until they reach a large fence, with the gate separating the main area of the room from a smaller area at the end. On the left of the seats with the spikes behind them is a protruding section of panelling, raised off the ground, which holds behind it 2 rows of seating. Once, the section could almost disappear. A mechanism that could concertina would allow it to move up and backwards, causing it to blend in with the rest of the wood panelled walls. The fittings in the room are black metal, including the spikes and the old lamps that have once had gas lighting. Almost directly in front of you, around the front of the room, are benches built into the fencing. If you turn 180 degrees, you'll see more bench seating around a large wooden table. Then, as you lift your gaze higher, you will see the grandest chair of them all. Front and centre, looking down over everyone, is of course the judge's chair.
That's a good description of the courtroom, but for those of us who don't know the room very well, I assume the area with the spikes is where the accused stood.
Yes, but the spikes were not there to stop them from escaping. They were apparently actually there because the possible criminal could have been held in the town's jail for a while, before being brought to their trial. Therefore, sweet-smelling flowers and garlands would have been hung along the spikes so the jury could not smell the criminal.
And when you say the jury, it's not a jury as we understand it nowadays.
It would have been most probably 12 good men and true, which is a phrase coined in the 17th century referring to a jury. At this time, women were not allowed to be part of the jury.
So we have the accused in front of the metal spikes, the jury in the large panelled box, and the judge in the central chair. What about the witness or the plaintiff?
They would have been just across the aisle from the accused. Imagine giving evidence against a possible criminal and they are about a metre away from you.
I imagine that could possibly be terrifying depending on what exactly the accused done.
Exactly. Also, for anyone who doesn't know, the defendant is the person who has been accused and the plaintiff is the person who makes a legal complaint against them. Anyway, I wanted to set the scene. However, this episode is not about the courtroom exactly, but instead is about someone who spent a lot of time there. No, not the judge or a member of jury. Today, we're talking about a criminal, the legend that is William Farley. You could almost say he's still there in our courtroom. Nowadays, there's a large painting hanging on the wood-panelled wall. This painting depicts an interesting scene, a major trial that took place in our courtroom. Painted by Henry Weigel, the scene shows Farley in a dock, noticed as being nicknamed Wing, the jury box containing the 12 good men, the judge, and all the other people you might expect to be present. The painting is titled The Whole Truth, and it was displayed in an exhibition at the Royal Academy in 1898. As you can probably already tell, we are exploring this trial, and trust me, this story has some interesting twists and turns. So much so that we decided to split this into two parts. I called him a legend because he is a bit of a legend now, in that we talk about him a lot and he seems to be notorious in his day. I think he also come across like a loaf, if we're using the metaphor from our show title. He wasn't well off or a high member of society. He was an ordinary person, really, possibly experiencing some personal struggles. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Isabel, you've got the details of his life, so I'll hand over to you to tell us about William Farley's beginnings.
Well, before we talk about Farley, let's look at what life was like around the time that he was living in this area. His Find a Grave record says he was born in 1845. However, the write-up of one of his trials he was involved in states his age. Therefore, we can calculate that he was actually more likely born in 1849. As much of the detail from the trials comes from newspapers, I thought we could briefly look at some of the other articles to get more of an insight into Sandwich between 1850 and 1900. In May 1848, the Kent Herald noted the details of what would be for sale at the Sandwich Corn Market, one of the many markets held in the town over the years. In the Canterbury Journal of October 1849, a trial of a woman who had been caught stealing was reported. The punishment was 1 month in the House of Correction and hard labour. Now, this may not seem to be hugely interesting. There would have been many accounts of petty theft around this time. However, a key detail here is the mention of the House of Correction. Sandwich had an old medieval jail. However, for approximately 50 years in the 1800s, there was also an actual prison near the area of Mill Wall called the Sandwich House of Correction. The Dover Chronicle published an article in 1863 referring to a ship belonging to the port of Sandwich, which was expected to arrive with its cargo. Slightly earlier, around the late 1840s, the coal trade was booming and Sandwich Quay was involved in this industry. In December 1869, the Kentish Gazette reported that a meeting had been held by the mayor for the purpose of considering the provision of a fire engine for the town. The majority voted in favour of this, and a house-to-house visitation took place to collect money in order to pay for it. In 1888, the Deputy of Brightling visited, a long-standing tradition in the town which still takes place today. And finally, in September 1890, the Kentish Gazette reported that a man had been charged with drunk while driving. You might be wondering why I'm mentioning this. Well, it paints a good picture of what life was like, because he wasn't driving a car, he was driving a horse and cart.
That's interesting. So we have the markets in Sandwich still continuing from the medieval period, although we're more used to hearing about cattle markets. We have the Sandwich House of Correction, or prison, established right on the edge of town. We have the coal trade taking place, and although the sea had receded by this time, trade was still an important aspect in the life of Sandwich. We have the town looking into getting a fire engine, and people using horses and carts to get around. And finally, we have the civic traditions of the council, which continue as they do today. That certainly paints a picture of Sandwich during the late 1800s.
Yes, so this gives us an idea of how things were when Farley was born, and as he grew up. He was actually born in Ramsgate, but as we have already said, he spent a lot of his time in Sandwich.
Do you have information about his upbringing at all?
Yes, there is a census record from 1851 with a William Farley listed, who was born in Ramsgate. This matches his Find a Grave record, as the parents' names match. Both these records suggest again that he was born around 1845. However, we actually know that his father was William Farley Sr. The record I just mentioned notes his father as having a different name. There is another record from 1851 with a William Farley living in Ramsgate, who is 2 years old, born in 1849, and the record includes the family members, including an older William Farley, who we understand to be his father.
Okay, so that's our Farley.
Yes, exactly. The family members include William Farley Sr., who is 30 years old, and Anne Farley, who is 24, who seem to be the parents. Then there is a 4-year-old Anne and a 2-year-old William, as well as two other people, Mary Bates, who is 42 and a visitor, and Eliza Stead, who is 16 and Farley Sr.'s sister-in-law.
Right, so William Sr. and Anne are the parents, and they have Anne Jr. and William Jr. This William Jr. is who we understand to be our William Farley, also known as Wing.
Yes, these records can be difficult to match up, but what we do know is the following. The family, as mentioned above, were living in Ramsgate in 1851. 10 years later, the family has expanded. The children, William and Anne, are 13 and 15 respectively. There's also Margaret, Eliza and Walter, as well as a servant. The family is living in Victory Villa. On the census in 1871, the family is living at Victory Lodge, in the same area as Victory Villa. The children are listed as well, although some of the names have changed, probably due to misunderstandings of the records. William Farley Jr. is around 22 years old here. Then, in 1881, the family was still living at Victory Lodge, but William Farley Jr., being around 32 by now, is no longer living with the family.
Oh, I'm intrigued. That is some good background information. Where was he in 1881 then?
The census is taken every 10 years, so Farley Jr. has probably gone through a series of life events between the age of 22 and 32. There is a record of him, and several details add together to show that the record is referring to the correct William Farley. I won't explain all of those now, but I will share that his birthday is correct, his occupation is a brickmaker, and he's living on Alexandra Road in Ramsgate.
Right, so he's got a job, he's moved out of his family home, but he's still in the same town.
And he's married with 3 children.
Oh, it seems to be doing quite successful then at the moment, married, 3 children.
Yes. As mentioned, this is confirmed by a variety of details. I will read you the best piece of evidence, which is actually from 1871, so it was probably after the 1871 census when he was 22. William Farley, eldest son of Mr. William Farley, builder, Victory Villa, Harrison to Ellen Marchmont. This is William Farley's marriage notice.
Farley, senior of Victory Villa. It all adds up.
Exactly. The 3 children Farley Jr. and Ellen have in 1881 are Florence, who is 8, Charles, who is 3, and Annie, who is 1.
That is a quite a lot of information we have about his family there. I think it would be best to move on to the prior convictions Farley had before the major trial, so we can build up more of a picture of him.
As you said, we know that William Farley was convicted for various crimes over the years. But we're going to start in January 1887, when William Farley was charged with stealing an oil lamp, which was worth 1 shilling and 9 pence. This is approximately £7 in modern currency. This wasn't an oil lamp as we might imagine it. It was used to protect the public on the highway near the sewage works at Pegwell. So despite not being worth a huge amount, it was more important than your average lamp, as stated at the trial. The trial can be summarised as Farley was seen at the sewage works. The lamp was found in his possession not long after this. Farley did claim that he was taking it to the police station when someone found him with it. After returning to the trial, the jury in the end found him not guilty. The recorder at the trial advised Farley to be careful because he had been in trouble before.
Multiple newspapers in the area were reporting these trials, so I'm going to add in an interesting detail from the East Kent Times and Mail. Farley stated that when he was taken into custody, the police officer said, "We'll send you to Charter again." What is being referred to here is the St Augustine's Hospital in Charlton, which was called Charlton Asylum for some time. In the 1870s, it was decided that the Kent County Asylum was not large enough to accommodate the county's lunatics, as they refer to, and so a new asylum was built at Charlton. We do not use this language today as it is considered offensive, but I'm going to define these terms for context in relation to Farley. There's a huge amount that could be explored here, but we have another story to tell, so I'll keep it fairly brief. The National Archives states that lunatic was used to describe a person who was sometimes of good and sound memory and understanding, and sometimes not. There was also imbecile or idiot, which meant a person was a natural fool from birth. People labelled imbecile were usually sent to workhouses or prisons with the aim of keeping them in custody. People labelled lunatic, however, were often sent to county asylums. Farley said that it had been his misfortune to go to Charlton before, and he didn't think it was right for the policeman to say this. So it's likely that those in charge of Farley's punishments believed him to be similar to the definition of a lunatic, in that he had moments of having sound understanding, but not always. The policeman denied saying this, but it is rather telling either way, because we now know Farley had been to Charlton, a hospital for people suffering from mental illnesses, among other things. I say among other things because at the time, people could be sent to asylums for other reasons, such as being disabled, or perhaps even for just not fitting in with society's norms.
That's really interesting and useful context for how they thought of Farley. But we can't leave it there. It's important to add some history of mental health as well, because we have very different attitudes nowadays. In 1774, the Lunacy Act was passed, which meant that patients had to have medical certificates in order for them to be committed, and the madhouses, as they had previously been known, had to be inspected. An attempted assassination on King George III caused the Criminal Lunatics Act to be passed. Then, in 1808, the County Asylum Act was passed, allowing for places to be built that would house the criminally insane. You mentioned the difference between people labelled lunatics and imbeciles earlier. It also seems to be a class issue, in that more wealthy families could afford to send their relatives to these places, whereas poorer people had to rely on other options and could end up in the workhouse or a prison. However, the provision of asylums by local authorities became mandatory, and this included ensuring mentally unwell people in workhouses or prisons were housed in an asylum instead. Growing populations in asylums actually meant that while treatment had moved towards what we would consider to be better, the overcrowding meant that staff returned to the old ways of dealing with patients, which included restraints and sedatives. The Science Museum explores this by discussing Hanwell Mental Asylum, where they state, by the end of the century, the optimism about county asylums had virtually disappeared. This was close to the time that Farley was being tried for his crimes.
These are horrible conditions that these mental asylums were in, so you can absolutely understand why Farley did not want to go back there, especially when the staff had resorted to the old practices of restraints and sedatives. Thank you for that. Are there any other interesting details from the oil lamp trial?
There is a useful account of him being charged for this crime, where we get to learn some of the responses from Farley and therefore the responses to him. He says, "How do you know my name is William Farley and not Wing?" Wing is actually his nickname, which is used in later references to him. When he says this, the chairman tells him he better behave himself. He responds that he will and looks directly at those charging him. He also says, "I had my coat to cover some herrings I had in a bucket. I wanted to keep them dry. If you saw a £5 note lying in the road, wouldn't you pick it up?" And there is laughter in response to this. Later in the trial, he also says, "Have you ever been to sea, Mr. Griggs? Did you ever see a lamp put in a basket on board a fishing smack? It's always put in the rigging, ain't it?" Now, it's difficult to understand exactly what he is referring to here, but he then says, "Send me to Maidstone and give me the benefit of the doubt this time," before saying more about the crime. This response is followed by laughter again. Finally, when asked if he wishes to call any witnesses to the trial, he says, "Ain't got none, only the stars and moon." Again, followed by laughter before he is removed from the room.
They're laughing along with him with his jokes. They're quite nice to him. I wonder what this kind of says about his character and that. It's definitely an interesting read when you think of a criminal on trial and that they're getting on with him in a way.
In contrast, we're now going to move to May 1888, when it was reported that Farley was charged with being drunk and disorderly and for assaulting a police officer. What's interesting here is the way he is described. The article calls him a notorious character. Another report, in the Dover Chronicle, states that he previously attacked the mail cart on the Sandwich Road and assaulted the driver. It also says, get ready for this, there were 23 previous convictions against him.
23, gosh, he definitely is a repeat offender here.
Indeed, as well as being a notorious character, it states, during the examination he behaved in a most eccentric manner, muttering and gibbering in a sort of unknown tongue. He was sentenced to 14 days of hard labour for being drunk and 4 months for assaulting the police officer. I want to pick up on some quotes from a report of a later trial for a different offence, which are as follows. He's referred to as being in drink, as he was a dealer, a hawker. When drunk, he did not seem responsible for what he had done, and he said the person accusing him owed him money for mushrooms. Now, in this 1888 trial, he was convicted for being drunk and disorderly. So could the behaviour described be that of an intoxicated person?
I mean, it's interesting, a lot of his comments there, especially if he's been owed money. It's interesting the use of notorious for notorious character. You would view that, I would view that as someone famous and well-known, like a hero, comic book character in a way. Especially also the word eccentric. They seem to be quite almost positive words. They're definitely unconventional for people who are criminals.
Yes, he's definitely seemingly not disliked among the community, or not to the same extent as you'd expect.
And muttering and gibbering in that sort of unknown tongue. I don't know what this could be. We don't know if there's some kind of bias at play here by the newspapers. It could be, it follows along with if he was intoxicated, maybe he was drunk at trial, but it also plays along to, well, the fact that he had previously been at Charlton Asylum. Could this be from suffering from mental illness, or I don't know what this could be. Compared to the previous trial on the oil lamp, don't you think that the way it's presented is quite different from then?
It does seem different. He seems to be almost more positively portrayed in the situation with the oil lamp. A bit more of a jokish kind of character rather than how he is perceived later when he is described as being eccentric or almost violent.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between everyone laughing at him being almost a jokester, to him now being drunk and then speaking in tongues. It definitely seems to be more of a, at the time we'd be using the word lunatic. You could also potentially say that maybe they were kind of fed up with him at this time, do you think? If he had 23 previous convictions, you've gone from being this guy stole an oil lamp but was going to give it back in, to this guy just keeps committing crime and won't stop.
It does seem like that. I certainly would be tired of someone coming to trial for the 23rd time, especially with so much of an escalation in crime, from going to stealing oil lamps that he claims to return to being drunk and assaulting someone. It's still interesting to read this description after learning the context about Chartham and how mental illness was treated at the time. We can see that he might not have been a career criminal as such, but he was committing crimes perhaps as a result of something else.
Well, listeners, I think we're starting to build a good picture of who William Farley was. And now, probably the moment everyone's been waiting for, let's talk about the major trial that Farley was involved in. The case was explored through other trials in Ramsgate, but it was also brought to Sandwich. William Farley stood in the dock of our courtroom, with those metal spikes behind him, just like he's depicted in the painting. The men of the jury looked down on him as he looked ahead, towards Lumley Smith, the recorder, and W.J. Hughes, the mayor.
A quick side note, this is how we know that Farley's father was William Farley Sr. The crime took place at the latter's house, Victory Villa, in Ramsgate.
Yes, a very useful detail that was recorded as part of this trial. So the indictment was read. William Farley, brickmaker, unlawfully wounding Sophia Hill and Elizabeth Gearing.
He's a brickmaker? That detail sounds familiar.
Indeed it does. So the story is as follows. William Farley Jr. went to his father's house and tried to kick the housekeeper and her mother out. And, quote, not only did he turn them out, but with a mallet, which he actually broke in the execution of his virtuous indignation, quite savagely attacked the two women. He's being charged with 3 counts: unlawfully wounding Sophia Hill, inflicting grievous bodily harm, and committing a common assault. Farley pleaded not guilty. Let's outline the details of the trial that took place in Sandwich, beginning with Mr. Proser representing Mrs. Hill, one of the victims. Mr. Proser characterised the attack as brutal and savage, then relayed the incident, which I just summarised. He proceeded to raise other pieces of information to reflect Farley in a bad light, which, I might add, in this situation is his job. He states the following. When in custody, Farley made statements to police officers which he thought would be difficult to reconcile now. Farley said he felt much easier after the attack than he had done for months. A suggestion was made on the prisoner's behalf as to intimate relations between his father and Mrs. Hill. Mr. Prosser believed, or alleged, that, labouring under some future excitement in connection with this, Farley had asked to be taken into custody and then committed the attacks in the same state. He wished to point out to the jury that Sophia Hill had been residing at Victory Villa in Ramsgate, William Farley Sr.'s house, for a period of 6 years, but he didn't see how this could justify Farley's behaviour towards her. There was nothing in the defence to say that the accused, that's Farley, was not responsible, in the legal sense, for his actions, or that he was under the influence of alcohol. Mr. Prosser ends his speech by stating he feels certain the jury would find Farley guilty of the offences.
Now it's Sophia Hill's turn to take the stand. She details the events of the incident from her perspective. She states that she has been Mr. Farley Sr.'s housekeeper for 6 years. On this particular day, she was in the parlour of his house, Victory Villa, when she heard knocking on the back door, and then her mother, Elizabeth Gearing, screamed. Mrs. Hill saw Farley Jr. in the kitchen. He then struck her with a croquet mallet several times. The croquet mallet is shown at the trial. He followed her into the yard, where he hit her multiple times, causing the croquet mallet to break. He then threw it onto the floor. At some point, Farley also threw water over her. PC Leper appeared. There were 2 people, Paramore and Sandy, who looked over the garden wall. Sophia said she was taken to Mrs. Whedon's cottage and Dr. Pollard attended to her. She was confined in bed for a month after receiving those injuries and suffered great pain, losing a large amount of blood. She was unable for some time to give evidence. This is Sophia Hill's story. But now I need to introduce Mr. Glynn, representing Farley in this trial. After Sophia delivered her version of events, Mr. Glynn cross-examined her. Sophia says Farley said he had come to clear them out. After being struck, she walked into the scullery, which is a small room usually attached to the kitchen. The water was thrown over her when she was in the yard. She then explained that she was a married woman and believed the prisoner and his brothers and sisters objected to her living at Victory Villa with their father. Sophia said her husband lived in the town and worked for Mr. Farley Sr. It is stated that Sophia is not separated from her husband by deed, but she slept with old Farley, although her husband lived in another part of the town. Her husband knew that she was living and sleeping with Farley Sr. In this area of the report, her statements are reported, but not Mr. Glynn's questions, so it is difficult to tell if this is stated by Sophia, therefore more likely to be true, or if Mr. Glynn is stating it in order to make her look bad, as Mr. Prosser did with Farley. It is then said that if she did not attend to Mr. Farley Sr., someone else would. We know this was actually said because the report notes it was met with laughter, to which the recorder says there is nothing to laugh at. The next statement, however, tells us what we need to know. She is re-examined by Mr. Glynn, to which she responds that she had been living with Farley Sr. in the manner described for 6 years. This suggests that the situation regarding her husband and her affair is true.
Sophia leaves the stand, and next up is Mr. Pollard, a surgeon, to give details of the injuries sustained by Sophia. He says the following. Sophia had 2 wounds on the back of her head that were very serious. She also had bruises on her back and her abdomen. Her left arm was very swollen, with bruising on the bone. Sophia was ordered to bed, and he believed that he attended her for 6 weeks. She had lost a great deal of blood during this, and the wounds could have been caused by the mallet shown at the trial. Now, we are going to move on to PC Leper's version of events, who stated he was called to Victory Villa on the day in question, and he took Farley into custody. He said on the way to the police station, Farley had said, "I feel easier here now than I have done for months." PC Leper is cross-examined by Mr. Prosser, and he added that Farley had asked to be taken into custody earlier that day. Leper is asked how he responded, to which he said that he had no reason for doing so. Sergeant Rodman gave a similar account, adding that Farley had appeared to be sober at the time. He says Sophia was bleeding very heavily from her injuries. Rodman is also cross-examined by Mr. Prosser, and stated Farley only consented to let him into the house on the condition that he was taken into custody. Sophia said that no one else was in the house at the time. This concluded Mr. Prosser's case against William Farley in favour of Sophia Hill.
Mr. Glynn is then called again and makes his statement in favour of Farley. He asked whether the jury had ever heard of a more disgraceful state of things than that which had been disclosed to the court with regard to the relations between Sophia Hill and William Farley Sr. He asked them to notice that he did not introduce this subject, but that Mr. Prosser alleged this woman was carrying out an adulterous relationship with his client's father, and therefore he must respond to the matter as well. Here they had a married woman, herself having a husband living elsewhere in town, living in the house with this old man. The old man living with her as his mistress near the residence of his grown-up sons and daughters. Not only so, but her husband, from whom she was not legally separated, was from time to time invited to wait upon her and this old man. Surely such a gross and unblushing act of wickedness had never before been disclosed in a court of justice. The woman herself seemed rather inclined to laugh at the fact, and that was the person who now acted as the victim in a case of unlawful wounding. This is a quote from Mr. Glynn to the court. Mr. Glynn states that he is not suggesting that this wicked act makes it okay for his client, Farley, to commit an assault on the woman, but he asked the jury to closely examine the evidence. Mr. Glynn says Mr. Prosser referred to the croquet mallet as a very dangerous weapon. He then says he has played croquet for several years and has never heard it described that way. He believed it was not the sort of weapon with which a man would arm himself when about to commit a serious and savage assault. Mr. Glynn's understanding is that Farley went to Victory Villa with the very best intention, which was ridding the house of Sophia Hill. Farley, quote, and his brothers and sisters were tired of seeing the old man with his grey hairs, himself almost in the grave, unquote, carrying on this relationship with Sophia Hill. When Farley arrived, he lost himself. This leads Mr. Glynn on to explaining that Farley was suffering from sunstroke at the time. The report then states, quote, what he, Mr. Glynn, wanted to suggest is that a struggle took place, and in the course of which his client inflicted the wound referred to. He refused to admit the attack was an unlawful and murderous one, nor did he admit that Farley was guilty of a common assault.
So to summarise, we have Mr. Prosser explaining what we understand to be facts of the case, which is that Farley quite forcefully injured Sophia, causing severe wounds. Then we have Mr. Glynn very much trying to encourage the jury to see that Sophia Hill is not a good person because of her affair with Farley Sr., as well as suggesting that what Farley did was actually more of accidental. Isabel, what are your thoughts on this?
It doesn't seem to be especially difficult to have an opinion on this. We know that he did inflict these wounds on these women, unless they developed an elaborate plan and framed him somehow, which seems unlikely. However, do you remember the different descriptions of Farley's character that we discussed earlier?
Yeah, he was described as notorious and gibbering, but he also seemed to laugh at him in a way that came across like they were just rolling their eyes at him. Like they're used to him being this way and they don't necessarily think that he's a terrible person.
What if I told you that I have statements from this particular trial about Farley's character?
I would say that it seems like an odd crime for him to carry out after the less serious crimes as he's done prior to this. So it would be interesting to know what people thought of him at this moment in time.
Exactly. I want to pick up on a point you just made. This is a serious crime, far more serious than the others he was convicted of. In fact, this story was not only reported in Kent or Thanet, it was in newspapers across the country and even in Northern Ireland. It was a big case, so people, certainly the people of Ramsgate, were bound to have opinions on the situation as well as William Farley.
Okay. I need to know, how was Farley described then? I think there's more to the story, but it could simply be that this happened to be his very first serious crime.
There is definitely more to the story. As with other episodes, the research has led to even more questions, but I think we should save that for part 2.
Oh, teasing you and everyone here on the big old cliffhanger now. Well, everyone, I suppose we have to wait a week to find out not only the verdict for the trial, but all of that other interesting details. Before you go, Isabel, this may only be part 1, but we still need a question of the week. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think the question of the week is quite an obvious one. We've said there is more to the story, so everyone tell us your theories.
Oh, yes, that's a good one. Listeners, where do you think the story is going to go next? That is, I'm sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger, everybody, but this story was such a huge one that we just have to. And come on, He doesn't love a good cliffhanger, though. Or are you excited for the next part, Isabel? Have you got any theories yourself? What are you thinking about?
Well, I personally don't have any theories that I want to present, but I am definitely looking forward to learning more about him in this following episode.
Absolutely. I just think how the difference in how he's presented or viewed in the jury from his different convictions, where he was laughed at like a jokester and then he was seemed like a lunatic, to now people having opinions on him from across the country, even to Northern Ireland. I'm very excited to think what public viewed about him, and of course what happened at the verdict. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Isabel. For the listeners, Isabel will be back for part 2 next week, where we all get to find out the truth and what happened. But thank you for now for joining us. It's been great having you here.
It's been wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.
We just wanted to give a quick reminder to email us any feedback, comments, or interesting facts that you know or discover in relation to the topics discussed in today's episode. Just email us at loavestodlegends@gmail.com or join our Discord server and be a part of our online Loaves to Legends community. The email and Discord link will be in the episode description, as well as on our website, sandwichguildhallmuseum.co.uk. With every episode, we'll be asking a question of the week on our Discord server. This week's question is, what are your theories? Where do you think the story is going to go next? Join our Discord and have a discussion with us and other listeners and find out what our answers at the Loaves to Legends team are. But for now, goodbye from us, Gia and Isabel. We've been Loaves to Legends, the history-based podcast from Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Thank you for listening, and we'll speak again soon. Loaves to Legends is produced by Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Millie and Gia are the executive producers. Today's episode was researched and written by Millie and edited by Millie. Gia and Isabel were your hosts today. Special thanks to Ian Pittaway for permission to use his translation of the music, and to Kat Batchelor for performing it. Finally, thank you to Beth Stone for the episode artwork.